Wings beneath the earth. The air in the obsidian deep did not smell at the earth. It smelled of ancient friction and a heat that didn't come from fire, but from the pressure of the world's own weight. Reth wiped a smear of soot from his brow, his pickaxe feeling like a leaden anchor in his calloused hands. To the mining guild of Oakhaven, the western hills were a treasure chest to be pried open. For generations, they had tunneled beneath the roots of the peaks, always mindful of the sky-caverns circling high above. Every miner knew the rule: work deep, stay silent, and never look a dragon in the eye when you surface. Then, Reth's pick struck a vein that didn't ring with the dull thud of stone. It sang. The rock face didn't shatter. It dissolved. A fissure opened, exhaling a breath of air so pure it tasted like liquid diamonds. Reth stumbled forward, falling through the gap and tumbling down a slope of warm, pulverized quartz. He stopped at the edge of an impossible precipice. Below him lay a cavern that defied the geometry of the dark. It was a cathedral of hollowed space, miles wide, lit by a sky that wasn't made of sun or moon, but of molten veins of gold pulsing in the ceiling like the capillaries of a god. In this inverted world, things were flying. At first, Reth thought they were dragons. They had the serpentine grace, the terrifying length, the predatory tilt of the head. But as one glided past the ledge where he cowered, he saw the horrifying truth. These creatures had no leather, no scales, no muscle. They were skeletal armatures of white-hot radiance, frames of pure humming energy that moved with a terrifying, noiseless precision. They were not breathing. They were transmitting. By the ancestors, Reth whispered, his voice swallowed by the velvet silence. He looked upward, through the translucent ceiling of the cavern, toward the surface world he had left behind. From this vantage point, the stone above was like smoked glass. He could see the real dragons, the ones the world feared, circling the mountain peaks. But from down here, he saw the strings. The winged monsters above were nothing more than luminous shadows, phantoms projected by the skeletal light beams in the deep. Every beat of a leather wing in the sky was a flicker of a pulse from the skeletons below. The dragons that had burned fortresses and demanded tithes were hollow illusions, gigantic, terrifying decoys. Why? Reth gasped, his mind fracturing. Why the lie? Because the world must look up. A voice resonated in his marrow, a vibration so deep it made the gold veins in the ceiling flare. If humanity looks up in fear, they will never think to look down in hunger. The skeletal dragons parted, and the floor of the cavern, a vast, undulating sea of shifting silt, began to rise. It wasn't a floor. It was a scale. Reth realized then that the entire western hill range was not a mountain. It was a spine. Coiled in a sleep that had lasted since the cooling of the crust was the World Eater. A titan so monumental that its single breath created the tectonic shifts of the continent. The skeletal dragons were its white blood cells, its ancient guardians. They projected the illusions of small dragons into the sky to give humanity an enemy they could understand, a monster they could try to fight, or appease, or study. The decoy dragons were a distraction. They were the scarecrows in the garden, designed to keep the crows of humanity from digging too deep and waking the thing that used the mountain as a pillow. Reth looked at his pickaxe, lying a few feet away on the quartz slope. To the titan below, his years of mining hadn't been an industry. They had been a persistent itch. One of the skeletal dragons drifted toward him, its head a cage of blinding light. It didn't have eyes, but Reth felt himself being scanned. His very soul weighed against the silence of the deep. "You have breached the skin, little termite," the voice hummed. "Now, you have a choice. Return to the surface and tell them the sky is a lie, and watch as they bring their drills and their greed to wake the Father of Fire, or become a part of the projection." Reth looked at his hands. They were beginning to shimmer. The skin was becoming translucent, the bones beneath turning into glowing filaments of light. High above, the villagers of Oakhaven looked up and saw a new dragon join the flight, a smaller, swifter shadow that seemed to move with a strange, hesitant human grace. They pointed in terror, unaware that the monster they feared was actually a boy they once knew. Now, a ghost in the sky, desperately screaming a warning that no one would ever hear. The transformation was a cold, agonizing brilliance. Reth felt his physical weight evaporate, replaced by a terrifying buoyancy. He was no longer a boy of flesh and soot, He was a tethered flare, a flicker of the World Eater's own subconscious cast against the ceiling of the world. Through his new, multifaceted vision, he saw his father, Doran, standing at the lip of the fissure. To Reth's draconic eyes, Doran was a frantic pulse of heat and stubborn intent, surrounded by barrels of blackwake powder. Reth didn't fly. He fell upward through the rock, his luminous form slipping through the molecular gaps of the limestone like water through silk. He erupted from the mine floor in a geyser of silent, white light. The miners screamed, scrambling back into the shadows. To them, a nightmare had just birthed itself from the deep. "Get back," Doran roared, his voice thick with the lung dust of 40 years. He held a sputtering torch over the primary fuse, a long, tar-soaked rope that led directly into the throat of the cavern. "I won't let some sky demon claim the Great Vein. This gold belongs to the Guild." "Father, stop!" Reth tried to scream, but the sound that left his throat was a harmonic thrum that shattered the nearby lanterns. Reth realized he could no longer speak the tongue of men. He lunged toward the fuse, his talons of light swiping at the sputtering flame. But his new form was a projection, a phantom. His claws passed through the torch flame like a breeze. He was a shadow trying to move a mountain. Doran, blinded by the radiance, saw only a monster attacking his lifeline. "Ignite it. Ignite the secondary lines." The miners threw their torches. The fuses caught. A dozen lines of fire began to race like orange vipers toward the heart of the hill. Reth looked down. Beneath the rock, he could feel the World Eater's pulse. The Titan was shifting. A tremor, no larger than a heartbeat, rippled through the valley. It wasn't an earthquake yet. It was a shudder of annoyance. Reth knew he couldn't stop the fire with force. He had to use the only thing he had left. His connection to the projection. He dove, not into the mine, but into the very stone of the fuse line. He expanded his light, stretching his skeletal frame until he was a thin, incandescent film coating the black powder. He became a heat sink as the fire reached him. Reth didn't let it ignite the powder. He absorbed the heat into his own glowing marrow. Every spark felt like a needle of ice, piercing his soul. His form began to flicker, the white light turning a volatile, angry red as he took the energy of the explosion into himself. "Reth?" Doran whispered, stepping closer. In the center of the blinding light, he saw a silhouette, the unmistakable curve of his son's shoulders, the way he tilted his head when he was thinking. "My boy." The powder didn't explode. It sublimated. The energy was redirected, channeled through Reth's light frame and projected harmlessly out through the sky dragons circling above. Far above the western hills, the decoy dragons suddenly flared with a blinding, noonday brilliance, letting out a roar that could be heard 3 kingdoms away. To the world, it looked like a display of power. In reality, it was the sound of a boy screaming in silence. Reth's form shattered. The light dissolved into 1,000 dying embers that drifted onto the mine floor. Doran knelt in the dust, reaching out for a handful of fading sparks. The Great Vein remained sealed. The World Eater settled back into its tectonic slumber, the itch on its spine momentarily soothed. The western hills were quiet once more, but the miners never returned to the deep. They had learned the truth. The dragons weren't guarding the gold. They were protecting us from the floor.